Welcome to Walking Through Second Corinthians. This is episode 8, and on chapter 8, we will resume our reading here in just a moment. There was, when we left off last time, a couple verses of chapter 7 remaining to be discussed, but I think I have discussed all I wish on that, and we'll pick up in chapter 8 then here in just a moment. I'll give you a moment to find it if you wish to follow along. Second Corinthians chapter 8 is where we resume the reading. I've enjoyed this. I hope you have too. I appreciate opportunity to read and also briefly discuss the things that are said by the Apostle Paul by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit here. And so let's resume again where we left off with chapter 8, verse 1. Moreover, brethren, we make known to you the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia, that in a great trial of affliction, the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded in the riches of their liberality. For I bear witness that according to their ability, yes, and beyond their ability, they were freely willing, imploring us with much urgency that we would receive the gift and the fellowship of the ministering to the saints. And not only as we had hoped, but they first gave themselves to the Lord and then to us by the will of God. So we urge Titus that as he had begun, so he would also complete this grace in you as well. But as you abound in everything, in faith and speech and knowledge, in all diligence and in your love for us, see that you abound in this grace also. Okay, we'll stop there. Something came to mind just as I was reading, and that is his mention again of Titus. If you look at chapter 7, he mentions Titus there as well. Once or twice. I know he mentions him in verse 13. And looking to see if there's another mention of him. Well, I'll just go with that for the moment. I won't search more. But for sure, Titus played a very instrumental role in the good work that Paul did. In some instances, there's the old saying, you can't be two places at once. And so Paul could only be one place at a time. And Titus, very much a helper with regard to the work Paul was trying to accomplish, being in, we'd say, maybe in more places than one. Okay, chapter 8 and verse 1 talks about a little something different than he's been discussing thus far. I'll just go ahead and say it is different. He wants to talk for the next couple, what we have as chapter divisions, 8 and 9. He doesn't divide them into chapters, but we have divided the Bible up into chapters and verses as helps. And so for the next couple chapters, 8 and 9, he'll talk about some promised giving or help to needy Christians, benevolence it might be called, that the Corinthians had been pledged to do. I say pledged, they had pledged. It wasn't like Paul pledged for their giving and they had no say in it, but that they had been on board with the idea. Paul may have encouraged it, of course, but it was their decision. And he, excuse me, and he uses some people up in the northern part of Greece. Corinth is in the south, in a region called Achaia at the time. Up in Macedonia, probably included Philippi, Berea, places like that. He just refers to them as the churches of that area, of the Macedonians, and how that though they're not a very well-to-do people, he calls it poverty, in fact, in their poverty they are abounding in liberal giving, along the lines of what he's talking about with them. And it's almost like a healthy competition. They're doing great, and they have much that they might not be up to your level on. I don't know how rich the Corinthians were, but he says specifically of the Macedonians that they were in great poverty. How does he put it? He says, there it is. Deep poverty is the New King James Version that I'm reading from, and that's in verse number 2, the deep poverty. And so these people weren't just poor, they were really poor. But that didn't keep them from abounding liberally in the work of helping needy Christians, and I believe this is needy Christians elsewhere, like over in Jerusalem, Judea, over in that area at the time. You can read about that elsewhere. And Paul's going to use a little healthy competition here to spur them. When I say healthy, competition sometimes cannot be so healthy. That's why I say healthy competition. To spur them to, don't let them show you up, kind of thing. And also Follow through and abound in what you promised or pledged to do. Don't just talk a talk, but walk a walk. And it's good to be wanting to be on board with this, but you need to follow through now. And well, anyway, one more thing, and we'll continue the reading. Back up to the reading that we just finished. The Macedonians had a key to their doing this well, and that is they first gave themselves to the Lord, and then to the work that Paul and others, he says, to us, meaning the work that we were wanting to encourage them to participate in, which they were. And it was first, though, giving themselves to the people, to Paul, to God, and then to these fellow Christians and so forth. Then the work, of course, of helping, I assume with money, but with some way or another, relief, support of needy Christians in other places. They were more, I hate to say easy, but more so able and willing and excitedly willing and able to do so. In fact, it sounds like Paul, the way he talks here, is surprised they outdid what we would have expected. And it's amazing how they seem to be surprising people in how abundantly they were able to give and excitedly begging to give, meaning they weren't just willing to give, they were wanting to give and to help out. And like I said, Paul's a bit of a healthy competition, trying to spur the Corinthians. Now you ought to be that way, and don't let the Macedonians show you up, if I might put that in my own words. And the last thing we read there in verse number 7 was, you've abounded in many ways, the Corinthians. Let's abound in this also. This grace of giving, he calls it a grace, that you abound in this grace, this giving to needy Christians business. You need to abound in that too. And there's a lesson, of course, more than one lesson, but there's good lessons for us in all of that too. Okay, verse 8. I speak not by commandment, but I'm testing the sincerity of your love by the diligence of others. Let me stop. See, I'm not really saying you got to do this, commanding, but I'm showing you how others are, and the diligence of others, hopefully putting you to a good place, or test, he calls it. Sounds a little bit like what I was saying a moment ago about a healthy competition. Okay, verse 9. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, that you through his poverty might become rich. And in this I give advice. It is to your advantage not only to be doing what you began and were desiring to do a year ago, but now you also must complete the doing of it, that as there was a readiness to desire it, so there also may be a completion out of what you have. For if there's first a willing mind, it's accepted according to what one has, not according to what he does not have. For I do not mean that others should be eased and you burdened, but by an equality, that now at this time your abundance may supply their lack, that their abundance also may supply your lack, that there may be equality. As it is written, he who gathered much had nothing left over, and he who gathered little had no lack. Okay, he's still talking about it for the remainder of chapter 8 and on into chapter 9. I just know that that's the case coming up. But let me pause here in the middle of this and say, some of it will sound like a review of what I was saying a moment ago. And that is that, that it's okay to not necessarily outdo each other in the sense that we gave $1 more than they gave. It's not just dollars and cents, as we'd put it in our own American money kind of way. It's also just, as long as it's according to what you're able to do, and it's God's holding you responsible for doing what you can with what you have, and not saying it's not enough if it doesn't outdo someone else. But I'm looking for equality. I'm sorry, I have something in my throat. And so it's an equality, not so much that people now get a free pass and don't have to be burdened in any way with this and let other people shoulder the burden, but that there be equality. And now you're able to contribute and help. It could be later, or actually there's a sense in which they've already helped, meaning if you regard the Jews as the recipients of this over in Judea, from them went the gospel originally, and the Corinthians have been beneficiaries. They've received beneficially the power of the spiritual message of the gospel, It's a good time for that to be a bit of a turnaround, not exactly, but in so many words, a turnaround that now they're lacking, and you can help them in a physical way. They help you spiritually, you can help them physically. And who knows what the future may hold? It could be in the future the table is turned again. And so that's the idea. And I'll say one more thing here before we resume the reading, and that is this, and that is that I'm not trying to command you and push you and force you or anything like that. I'm just saying you desired to be on board with this a year ago. It's great that you were desirous and talking a good line. That's me putting in my own words, talking a good line about it. But you got to follow through now. You got to follow through. Okay, I think I'll let that be it. For that, let's finish the chapter and we'll stop for today. 16. But thanks be to God who puts the same earnest care for you into the heart of Titus, for he not only accepted the exhortation, but being more diligent, he went to you of his own accord. And we've sent with him the brother whose praise is in the gospel throughout all the churches. By the way, we can maybe guess who that is, but we don't know for sure. He doesn't name him. He names Titus. Back to the reading. And not only that, but who has also was also chosen by the churches to travel with us with this gift, which is administered by us to the glory of the Lord himself, and to show your ready mind, avoiding this, that anyone should blame us in this lavish gift which is administered by us, providing honorable things, not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. And we've sent with them our brother, whom we have often proved diligent in many things, but now much more diligent, because of the great confidence which we have in you. If anyone inquires about Titus, he's my partner and fellow worker concerning you. Or if our brethren are inquired about, they are messengers of the churches, the glory of Christ. Therefore show to them and before the churches the proof of your love and of our boasting on your behalf. Now, Titus is mentioned again. I had said something about that earlier, and there's one or two anonymously mentioned people here. Helpers, people maybe that traveled with Titus, messengers, he calls them, of the churches and of the glory of Christ. And make sure that you treat them well, and he's encouraging all of that, and complimenting as well. Titus, for instance, going of his own accord to be participating in this, and it's wonderful what he did. One thing before we finish today, though, I want to mention or bring out in commentary that's said there, and that is that we don't only try to do things honorable in the sight of men, but honorable and looking, I might in my own slang way say looking approved and good in the sight of men as well. Everybody needs to be pleasing to the Lord, of course. Primary, first of all, most of all. But sometimes, and maybe that's nothing more so the case than when handling finances, that you do things a little bit extra, you might say, to make sure that it doesn't appear to be suspiciously handled in the sight of men as well. And it could apply to other things, but in this case it seems to be being applied to the management of funds or money or whatever that would be useful for relief. He says we want to make sure that everything's approved, not only in the sight of God, but in the sight of men. And these people are approved and selected by the churches and so forth, words to that effect. And last thing I'll say is this, that today, there might be extra measures made to make sure that no one wonders or questions, what about this, what about that, when it comes to the handling of church funds. Open and above board, maybe 2 or 3 people counting, or an open statement of finances, or other things that might be said or done to make sure that there's just nothing dishonorable in the management of something, even though it may be handled honestly before God. I don't want people, though, thinking less of it. And so we try, Paul said, to do things not only approved in the sight of the Lord, but approved in the sight of men, or honorable in the sight of men as well. Okay, I guess that's all I've got. And we'll stop there. It seems to be, once again, we're going along an episode with a chapter. That's not intended, but it is the case again. We finished chapter 8, and so episode 9, we'll begin chapter 9, God willing, next time. Thank you for tuning in today, though. Thank you.